Welcome to the deep dive, where we really tear apart the source material so you don't have to. Today, we are radically rethinking the plate, and maybe more importantly, the soil beneath it.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about food production, there's this big assumption, right? The chef decides the menu tells the farmer what to grow, and the farmer just has to figure it out. Often, no matter the ecological cost, that's the usual way, the traditional, and as we'll see, pretty destructive model.
Exactly. And our deep dive today is all about flipping that completely on its head. It's a revolutionary idea, really. Instead of the farm just reacting to the menu has to be, well, consciously designed to reflect and actually reinforce the health of the ecosystem that grew the food. The meal itself becomes the tool for agriculture.
Wow. That is a profound flip. It totally shifts the power dynamic, doesn't it? Away from just what the consumer wants, towards ecological responsibility. So we're looking at sources today that explore the philosophy, but also the practical steps. How do we actually do this? How do we move away from that extractive industrial model towards something else, something we call the third plate ideal?
And for anyone not familiar, that term third plate, it's about moving beyond the past and the present. The first plate is sort of traditional regional food, think old school European peasant food maybe. The second plate is what most of us eat now, that standardized, high-volume industrial food system, big ag, essentially. The third plate is the future we're aiming for, where flavor, ethics, ecology, they're all woven together. So our mission today is to explore things like regenerative agriculture, this idea of a local auto system, and importantly, what this new way of eating demands from you, the eater. Because it does demand a shift.
Yeah, that's a great point. We usually focus so much on what's in our food, right?
Right.
The calories, the protein, maybe the pesticides. But this deep dive, it's fundamentally about what our food choices are doing to the soil, to the whole ecosystem, and even to the culture of how we eat. It's a big design problem, really. And the solution, maybe surprisingly, starts right there on your dinner plate.
Okay, so to really get why we need this third plate, this ecological approach, we first need to stare unflinchingly at the system we have now, just how destructive and frankly how entrenched it is, especially its reliance on just massive consolidation of power,
Yeah.
and how it pushes all the real costs, environmental, human, off the books, externalizes them.
Right. Let's unpack that consolidation first.
Yeah.
Because it's not like it just happened slowly. The sources point to a really rapid escalation, particularly since the 1980s, that completely rewired American agriculture.
Oh, it's staggering when you look at the numbers. The beef industry is a prime example. Back in the early 80s, the top 4 meatpacking firms controlled maybe 25% of the market. That's, competitive-ish. Just 15 years later, that jumped to over 71%, way past what economists consider healthy competition. And today, just 4 companies, JBS is one of the big ones, control a whopping 85% of all beef slaughter in the U.S. 85%.
And when you have so few buyers, well, the people actually raising the cattle, the ranchers, they're the ones who feel the squeeze, right? That power imbalance hits their bottom line directly.
Directly and brutally. Over the last couple of decades, the rancher's share of every dollar you spend on beef at the store, it's fallen off a cliff. From about 63 cents down to just 46 cents.
Wow.
That's a massive wealth transfer, basically engineered by market control.
How do they maintain that control? Is it just size?
Size is part of it, but it's also clever market manipulation. The key tool is something called captive supplies. These are cattle the big packers own themselves, or they've bought way in advance on contracts. So picture this. An independent rancher, no contract, brings their cattle to market. Maybe prices are starting to creep up a bit because supply is tight. What do the big packers do? They flood the market with their own captive cattle, instantly pushes the price right back down. It means they almost never have to pay a truly fair, market-driven price to those independent guys.
That just sounds structurally rigged. It traps the independent producers. If they can't get a decent price, they have to cut corners, produce faster, cheaper, which probably pushes them towards the very industrial methods like feedlots that benefit the packers in the first place, a vicious cycle.
Exactly. It locks them in.
Right.
And if we follow that chain from the ranch economics into the slaughterhouses, that's where we hit the immense human cost of this relentless drive for efficiency. We were talking about statistically the most dangerous job in the entire United States, meat packing.
I saw those injury stats in the source material. I mean, I was genuinely shocked. The injury rate in a slaughterhouse is something like 3 times higher than in a typical American factory.
That's right. About 40,000 people every single year suffer injuries or illnesses serious enough to need medical care beyond just first aid. 40,000. And everyone agrees that number is a massive undercount.
Why is that?
Because of fear. Fear of getting fired, especially if you're an immigrant worker, maybe undocumented, maybe don't speak English well. These facilities rely heavily on vulnerable populations. Plus, reporting systems aren't always great, so the official numbers, probably just the tip of the iceberg.
And the work itself is just so hard, so dangerous, the line speed so fast, that leads to another symptom of a totally broken system, right? The turnover.
Astronomical turnover. It's unbelievable. Companies basically have to constantly recruit new bodies because the annual turnover rates are often over 100%.
100%. Meaning they replace their entire workforce every year.
Or even more. Rates of 150% are not uncommon. This constant churn means the workforce is always new, always insecure, less likely to organize, less likely to complain about safety or wage theft. You have to understand, the human suffering isn't just an unfortunate side effect. It's structurally necessary for this low-cost industrial model to keep churning.
That's a really sobering analysis. Harmful to ranchers, harmful to workers.
Ooh.
Okay, let's pivot to the environmental cost. You mentioned this paradox of efficiency. How does that play out environmentally?
Well, the paradox is that industrial agriculture is obsessed with one kind of efficiency, maximum yield per acre, usually of one single crop. But it achieves this by being incredibly inefficient in its use of other resources, especially when you look at feeding grain to livestock.
Oh, yeah, break down those conversion ratios again. They really tell a story, don't they?
They really do. So, track how much grain it takes to get 1 pound of weight gain on an animal. For a steer in a feedlot, it's about 7 pounds of grain for every 1 pound of gain.
7 to 1.
Right. Pigs are a bit better, maybe 3.5 pounds of grain per pound of gain. Poultry and eggs, they're the most efficient of the common factory mates, just over 2 pounds of grain needed. And here's a key point often missed. Grass-fed animals, while better ethically in some ways, are actually less efficient in converting plant mass to meat than grain-fed. A grass-fed steer needs at least 3 times more plant matter than a feedlot steer for the same weight gain. It's just a different kind of resource demand.
But focusing on the grain, the sheer scale of this grain feeding is what's staggering. It's not a small side operation.
Oh, not at all. Globally, something like a third of all the cereal crops grown end up as animal feed. But in the U.S., it's way higher. According to 2020 data, two-thirds of the entire U.S. grain harvest was fed to animals.
2/3. That's unbelievable.
It requires vast amounts of land, obviously, land that could be used differently, and often drives deforestation elsewhere to grow more cheap commodity crops like corn and soy.
And the land that is used for these crops, it's subjected to this intense chemical control. It basically wages war on the natural ecosystem, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. This is where we get that really chilling phrase from the source material. Take industrial tomato farming in Florida, for example. Standard practice involves using highly toxic fumigants, chemicals like methyl bromide, which is known as a bad actor chemical, really nasty stuff. And the goal, to literally kill everything in the soil before planting. Weeds, diseases, nematodes, beneficial microbes. Everything. The explicit aim, written down, is to achieve a soil that is suitably lifeless. Then they plant their uniform hybrid seedlings.
Suitably lifeless. That phrase it stops you in your track. It perfectly captures the fundamental difference in worldview, doesn't it? Between industrial farming and the ecological design we're talking about. One sees soil life as a problem to be eliminated. The other sees it as the absolute foundation.
Exactly. And all this ruthlessness, this pursuit of industrial perfection often leads to, well, the illusion of quality, not the real thing.
Right. We get tomatoes that can survive a cross-country truck journey, but taste like, well, cardboard.
The industrial tomato is kind of the classic example here, and for good reason.
It's the perfect symbol of flavor dilution. Modern cultivated tomatoes, the ones bred for shipping and shelf life, they contain less than 5% of the genetic diversity of the entire tomato gene pool.
Only 5%.
Yep. Breeders have relentlessly selected for size, shape, water content, durability, everything except flavor and nutrients. As one expert put it, they've had all the good points diluted out of it. What's left is basically just the package and added water.
It's such a betrayal of what a tomato could be. But then flip that coin. When we look at processed foods, the industry doesn't dilute flavor. It engineers hyperflavor to hook us, right? This is the whole bliss point thing. Exactly. The bliss point. It's a term food scientists use. It's the precise amount of sugar or fat or salt that creates the maximum sensory pleasure for the consumer, makes you want more. And they target this very deliberately, especially for kids' products. Research shows a child's bliss point for sweetness can be incredibly high, maybe 24% sugar, sometimes even up to 36% sugar in a product.
36%. That's like pure sugar.
It's often double what an adult would find pleasant in the same food.
And this scientifically calculated bliss point actually drives the design of things like sugary cereals, those instant breakfast drinks.
Absolutely. It dictates the formulation. So you have this bizarre contradiction. The industrial system strips the natural, complex flavor out of whole foods through its farming practices, and then pumps synthetic, often addictive hyperflavors into processed goods made from the cheap outputs of that same system. It's just broken. Ecologically, ethically, nutritionally, it's broken. Okay, so if that's the broken system built on extraction, killing the soil, hiding costs, faking flavor, then the alternative, this ecological reversal, has to be built on completely different principles. Regeneration, working with nature cycles, closing loops.
Yeah.
And this really starts with tackling the climate crisis head on.
Right. We establish agriculture is currently a big part of the climate problem, a major source of greenhouse gases.
A huge source. Depending on how you measure, farming is responsible for something like 10% to 16% of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. For climate safety, for ecological survival, really, that has to flip. Agriculture needs to go from being a source to being a sink. It needs to draw down carbon.
And you said earlier, the biggest barrier to that, to building soil carbon, is conventional tillage, plowing. Why is that so central?
It really comes down to the physics and the biology of soil. See, most of our food system relies on annual crops, corn, soy, wheat, vegetables, things that need planting every single year. And conventional planting requires tilling the soil, turning it over. When you till, you do two really damaging things. First, you physically shatter the soil structure. You break apart the little clumps, the aggregates that hold carbon and protect nutrients. Second, you inject a huge amount of oxygen deep into the soil. This fires up the microbes, and they basically burn through the stored soil carbon way faster than usual, releasing it as CO2 into the atmosphere.
And on top of losing carbon, you also get massive erosion risk.
Catastrophic risk. When soil is tilled and left bare, it's incredibly vulnerable. Wind and water can just carry it away. Under continuous annual tillage, soil erosion rates can be 10 times, even 100 times faster than the rate at which new soil forms naturally.
100 times faster.
Yes, it's literally eating itself, a fundamentally unsustainable system.
Okay, so the answer has to be regenerative agriculture, which is all about reversing that carting flow, right? Pulling CO2 out of the air and putting it into the ground as stable soil organic matter.
That's the core idea. It's not just some niche trend. It's becoming recognized as a climate necessity. And it's built on, well, the sources identify 4 key pillars. First is integrating trees, agroforestry. Trees provide deep roots, stability, shade, habitat. Second is managed grazing, using animals properly, moving them frequently, or using compost to mimic that natural fertilization effect. Animals become part of the cycle, not a separate problem. Third, always keeping the soil covered. Cover crops, never leaving it bare and vulnerable. And fourth, moving to no-till or minimum till systems, protecting those soil aggregates and the carbon already stored there. Essentially, you're trying to mimic the structure and function of natural perennial ecosystems, like forests or prairies, which are much better at holding onto soil and carbon.
Okay, so building topsoil is pillar 1. What about closing the nutrient loops? This polyculture and waste idea, getting away from just pouring on chemical fertilizers and instead using the farm's own resources.
This is absolutely crucial. It's about restoring ecological integrity. Think about the difference, right? A natural forest needs 0 human inputs. It thrives, stays healthy on its own. Compare that to a typical garden or farm monoculture. It needs constant weeding, constant feeding, constant pest control. It's exhausting work. Why? Because it ignores nature's rules. The rule that everything needs to be connected, that waste from one thing is food for another. When you break those connections, you create the very problems, the pests, the diseases, the nutrient depletion that you then have to fight with chemicals and hard labor.
And the complexity happening within the soil itself is just incredible. We tend to focus on NPK fertilizers from a bag, but the real fertility engine is biological.
Totally. The soil food web is where the magic happens. We often forget about things like earthworms, but a healthy acre of garden soil might have 2 or 3 million earthworms. And those worms can move something like 18 tons of soil per acre per year, aerating it, mixing organic matter, creating channels for water.
18 tons.
It's amazing. And then you have the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, this whole intricate web. They are constantly breaking down organic matter and making nutrients available to plants in just the right amounts at just the right time. As the sources say, fertility isn't something you buy in a bag. It's something that flows through a living system.
And this integration, this flow, it's not just microbes. It really clicks when you bring crops and animals back together.
Right.
Using what the industrial system calls waste manure crop residues as a key resource.
Yes. This is fundamental to the third plate idea. It's ecological common sense. Instead of trucking in commodity corn and soy from hundreds or thousands of miles away to feed your pigs, and then having a huge manure lagoon problem that pollutes waterways, you feed the pigs, farm scraps, maybe away from cheese making, cover crops surpluses, and their manure goes back onto the fields to fertilize the next crop. There's a great historical example from Japan. Farmers putting ducks into their rice paddies. Just 10 little ducklings in a quarter-acre paddy provided all the manure needed for fertility, and they ate the weeds and insects. Perfect integration.
That's brilliant. And we can't talk about soil life without mentioning fungi. They seem to play an absolute critical role.
Oh, fungi are unsung heroes. Super important. For one thing, they're basically the only organisms that can efficiently break down lignin.
Lignin. That's the tough, woody stuff in plants.
Exactly. Most bacteria can't really handle it. Fungi are the primary decomposers of wood. But even more important, maybe, are the mycorrhizal fungi. These are the ones that form symbiotic relationships directly with plant roots.
Okay, let's get this term right. Chelates. This sounds important.
It is. Mycorrhizal fungi produce these special organic molecules called chelates. Think of a chelate like a tiny claw or a key. It's designed to grab onto mineral nutrients in the soil, things like phosphorus, iron, copper, zinc, that are often locked up and unavailable to plants. The chelates essentially unlock these minerals, break them down into a form the plant can absorb, and deliver them right to the root. In exchange, the plant feeds the fungi sugars it makes through photosynthesis. It's this amazing partnership. It's a far more sophisticated, self-regulating nutrient delivery system than just dumping soluble chemical fertilizers onto the soil, which often just wash away.
So we're moving from this linear, leaky, input-heavy model to a circular, self-sustaining system, which naturally leads to this idea of the local auto system. What does that mean exactly?
The auto system idea is really about shifting focus from globalized uniformity back to local diversity and self-reliance. The strength of farming, ecologically speaking, is in diversity, not monoculture. This notion that every single farm has to plug into the global commodity system and try to feed the world with standardized crops, that's precisely what drove the need for chemical warfare on the soil in the first place. Instead, the auto system asks, how can this specific farm in this specific place become more diverse, more resilient, better for nature, even through small adjustments?
And part of that local focus is acknowledging that sometimes the push for purely plant-based diets bumps up against geographical reality, right?
That's a really crucial nuance. We have to be careful that ecological eating doesn't become just an urban luxury concept. A huge number of the world's poorest people live on marginal lands. Think deserts, high mountains, tundra, very dry grasslands. You simply cannot grow enough calories from plants alone in many of these places to support a population. But ruminant animals, camels, goats, sheep, hardy cattle breeds are uniquely adapted to these environments. They can take tough, indigestible cellulose, thorny shrubs, dry grasses that humans can't eat, and turn it into high-quality milk and meat. For cultures like the Maasai in Africa, or traditional Navajo herders, or Mongols on the steppe, these animals are essential for survival. There's often no other viable food source in their landscape.
So the auto system respects those local realities, and it also formalizes the relationship between the community and the land.
Yes, ideally, it creates a situation where the producers, the consumers, the citizens, they're often the same people, or at least closely connected within a defined local area. They collectively understand their dependence on their local resources and often work together to manage them, maybe through things like community land trusts or tight property commons. The source material uses this interesting phrase, "for the goal," achieving knowing indifference to the prepackaged, off-the-peg agricultural systems.
Knowing indifference. That sounds a bit passive, almost like not caring. But you mean the opposite, don't you?
Exactly the opposite. It's not apathy. It's profound attentiveness. It means having the confidence and the local knowledge to ignore the standardized advice coming from global agribusiness or government programs that push one-size-fits-all solutions. Instead, you focus intensely on your specifics. Your soil, your rainfall patterns, your slopes, your local markets, your community needs, your history. Success in this auto system model comes from figuring out clever, low-input, often low-money ways of farming that are perfectly tailored to your unique circumstances. It's about local adaptation, not global standardization.
Okay, so if we're going to make this ecological reversal work, designing the farm from the menu, it demands a pretty huge cultural shift from us as eaters and from chefs, too. It means chefs needing more humility, maybe, Not just demanding the perfect uniform carrot every time, and eaters needing to appreciate, well, variety,
Yeah.
seasonality, things that aren't perfectly predictable.
Absolutely. We have to fundamentally detox from this expectation of having everything available perfectly uniform 365 days a year. That's a very, very recent invention of the industrial food system. It's not normal, historically or ecologically. For most of human history, in most places, eating was completely tied to the seasons. People intimately understood the rhythm, planting in spring, main harvest in late summer fall, and then surviving the winter on stored, preserved, fermented foods, cabbage, roots, dried beans, salted meats. The modern supermarket has totally disconnected us from that natural cyclical reality.
And when you look back at truly functional traditional cuisines, the ingredients weren't just chosen in isolation. They were chosen for how they worked together,
Yeah.
reflecting what the land actually provided seasonally. I love the example in the sources about smoked pork.
Yes. It illustrates this perfectly. Think about smoked pork shoulder, maybe the bonier cuts, the ones with less prime fat. These weren't necessarily prized as a standalone centerpiece protein, like a pork chop is today. Their unique, smoky, pungent flavor was valued specifically for its ability to season the cooking liquid, the broth. And that broth was then used to cook whatever greens were abundant and maybe a bit bland on their own, things like wild lamb's quarters or purslane in the spring and summer. So the meat wasn't the star. It was chosen for its function in elevating the whole seasonal yield, making sure everything got used, and the final dish tasted complex and deeply satisfying, reflecting the farm's integrated output.
That philosophy of integration, using everything purposefully, it even shows up in the tools and techniques, doesn't it? Like how different cultures approach something as basic as using a knife.
It's fascinating. The sources contrast Chinese and European knife techniques. In traditional Chinese gastronomy, there's this term kopang, which basically means cut and cook.
Yeah.
And the knife skills, the daogong, were considered incredibly important, maybe the highest art of the chef. The typical knife, the two, is that wide, flat rectangle of steel. And the motion isn't rocking. It's a very precise, often loud up and down chop.
Why was the cut itself so central to the cuisine?
Because the daogong wasn't just about making things bite-sized. It was about fundamentally changing the texture and cooking properties of the ingredient. With that one simple-looking knife, skilled cooks could produce an amazing array of intricate shapes. Slivers, threads, cubes, horse ears, phoenix tails. These shapes weren't just decorative. They affected how quickly the food cooked in a wok, how well it absorbed sauce, how it felt in the mouth. It was about creating specific sensory experiences. This contrasts sharply with the typical European chef's knife technique, that rocking locomotive motion, which is really optimized for speed and uniform slicing or dicing. Different priorities, reflecting different culinary philosophies. In the Chinese tradition, the way you cut was integral to the integrity and quality of the final dish.
This really brings us back to the core idea. Food has a moral architecture. If we accept that the menu needs to design the ecosystem, then our choices about what goes on that menu, they become our primary lever for change.
Absolutely. Deciding what to eat, and maybe just as importantly, what not to eat, what to reject. That's the foundational act. It shapes everything else in the production and consumption chain. And every one of those choices carries an accountability with it.
And the sources frame this accountability not just in, say, environmental terms like carbon footprint, but as inherent moral claims embedded in the food itself. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's a powerful idea. Take meat, for example. Even when it's neatly wrapped in plastic at the store, it embodies several deep moral claims. First, the act of raising and butchering an animal, like a pig, is itself a moral claim about the value we place on animal life versus human needs or desires. Second, setting the price for that meat is a moral claim. It inherently creates social limits on who can afford it, who gets access. Third, the environmental impact the land used, the feed consumed, the methane produced, the transportation footprint that constitutes a moral claim regarding our responsibility to the planet and to future generations. Morality, in this sense, isn't just about personal virtue signaling. It includes our conscious acceptance, or perhaps our unconscious acceptance, of all the cultural norms and consequences bound up in that piece of meat.
Wow, that really makes you think. It suggests we can choose conscience over just convenience. And the sources give some powerful examples of how this can work politically, how consumers and workers can organize to force change, even without waiting for governments to act.
The story of the coalition of ecologically workers, the CIW in Florida, is absolutely inspiring and instructive here. They're mostly farm workers, picking tomatoes in conditions that were, frankly, horrific. Poverty wages, abuse, even modern-day slavery in some cases back in the 90s. They tried traditional labor organizing against the growers, but it was tough. The growers were diffuse, often claimed they couldn't afford more. So the CIW made a brilliant strategic shift. They decided to target the buyers of the tomatoes, the huge, publicly visible corporations like Taco Bell, McDonald's, Walmart.
Pressure the brands with the reputations and the deep pockets,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just the struggling farmer.
Exactly. They launched boycotts, protested, used public pressure, and it worked. By around 2010, they had signed up companies representing over 90% of the Florida tomato industry into their Fair Food program. This program isn't just talk. It involves a strict code of conduct for growers monitored by a third party. Crucially, it includes a penny per pound bonus paid by the corporations that goes directly to the workers' wages. It directly addressed the terrible conditions, and through their investigations and worker hotlines, they actually uncovered and helped federal authorities prosecute multiple cases of forced labor, freeing over 1,200 people from literal slavery.
That's incredible.
It's proof that targeted, organized consumer and worker pressure on corporate buyers can be an incredibly powerful force for systemic moral change in the food system.
And when you achieve that kind of ecological design, that kind of moral integrity in the system, the result seems to be just plain better food, right? Better flavor, better health. The ecology of flavor follows the design.
It really seems to. When a system is ecologically tuned, holistic, it tends to produce quality as a natural outcome. Think about that dehesa system in Spain we mentioned earlier, the oak savanna with the grazing animals. It's not just producing one thing. It produces the world's best ham, jamon iberico from pigs eating acorns, but also high-quality beef, cork from the trees, maybe figs, olives. And the system is so productive, there's enough leftover resource, enough acorns and pasture to sustainably fatten geese, too. The farmer's profit, the amazing flavor of the products, and the health of the ecosystem are all intertwined. They rise and fall together based on the vitality of the soil and the integrity of the cycles.
And it's fascinating that modern nutrition science is increasingly confirming that the standard Western industrial diet is, well, it's the weird one, historically speaking.
It absolutely is the anomaly. Humans have evolved to be incredibly adaptable eaters. Look around the world at traditional diets. Some are almost all meat, like the Inuit, some nearly all plant-based, some high-fat, some high-carb. Humans thrived on a huge variety of patterns, but the one pattern we seem definitively not well adapted to is the modern industrial Western diet. Super high in refined sugars, refined grains, industrial seed oils, and low-quality animal fats, while being low in fiber and micronutrients. There's a strong argument, backed by good evidence, that a lot of overeating in developed countries isn't just pure gluttony. It might be that the industrial food is so nutrient-poor, so lacking in real satiety signals, that people stay hungry on a deeper level, always searching for the nourishment their bodies aren't getting, even when they're full of calories.
And the health research strongly supports shifting towards diets that align more with these ecological principles as a preventative strategy.
Undeniably, diets rich in whole plant foods, which are naturally easier to produce in diverse, regenerative systems, consistently show powerful protective effects against chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and many cancers. And it's not usually one single superfood or nutrient doing it. It's the synergy of the whole pattern, the fiber, the phytonutrients, everything working together. Conversely, there's evidence linking high consumption of animal protein, especially from industrial sources, to increased levels of hormones like IGF-1, which promotes cell growth and is a known risk factor for cancer. The connection is clear. The health of the soil environment, the way food is grown, directly impacts the quality of the food, which directly impacts human health. If the farm system is broken, the food is broken, and eventually the health of the eater breaks down too. #tag outro.
So let's try and bring this all together. We've covered a lot of ground. The big takeaway seems to be this profound reversal of pressure. We need to stop demanding absolute uniformity, demanding year-round strawberries, demanding flawless but tasteless tomatoes. Because that demand is what fuels the destructive industrial machine. Instead, we, as eaters and cooks, need to start embracing, even celebrating, the variable, the seasonal, the ecologically diverse outputs that come from truly healthy living soil.
That's it exactly. And the mindset shift required is captured in that phrase, knowing indifference. Not indifference as in apathy, but indifference to the easy, off-the-shelf, standardized solutions peddled by big agriculture. Instead, cultivate radical attentiveness to the local. What works here? What does the soil need? What grows well in this climate with minimal inputs? Success comes from farmers having the knowledge and freedom to figure out farming styles perfectly fitted to their unique place, their unique circumstances, not just chasing a global commodity price.
And that shift demands patience from us, doesn't it? And a deeper ecological appreciation. So the final provocative thought for you, the listener. If our cuisine choices really can be used to design a healthy ecosystem, What unexpected, maybe overlooked product of ecological variety might soon show up on your plate if we start eating this way?
Yeah, think beyond the usual suspects. What if we learned that certain shallow-rooted vegetables don't actually need perfectly tilled, lifeless soil? What if they could grow perfectly well, maybe even better, right on top of a thick layer of decomposing leaves and twigs, building soil underneath them as they grow? That completely flips conventional gardening wisdom. Or think about mushrooms. We mostly eat one kind, the white button mushroom. But what about exploring other fungi that are common in local ecosystems? Maybe things like reishi mushrooms, Ganoderma lucidum, these annual polypores found all over temperate forests. Could they be part of this new menu? The future menu, the third plate menu, isn't about limiting ourselves. It's about expanding our palates to appreciate and savor the true, complex, delicious richness that comes from a thriving, functioning ecosystem. It requires connection, curiosity, and maybe a little bit of adventurous eating.